And in this session, we're going to delve into the world of eco-friendly construction and the innovative methods being employed in sustainable building practices. Today, the construction industry is becoming more environmentally conscious than ever before. And we have a fantastic lineup of experts to share their knowledge with us. The topic of this discussion is Building a Green Future, a look into green building practices. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Ms. Daniele Horton, who is the founder and CEO of Verdani Partners, and Debi-Lee Wilkinson, CEO and president of Kepler ReCapture. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you. This is a really important topic. It's about our long-term survival.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Is it working?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So thank you so much for being here. Just us, our panel, standing between the reception. So we really appreciate you supporting, and I hope you get some value out of it. But good afternoon, and welcome to this fireside chat titled Building a Green Future and Looking at Green Building Practices. I'm really excited to be here today and honored to introduce myself and my fellow panelist, Debi-Lee, to discuss some of the top green building trends in the industry. I'm going to introduce myself, and then Debbie's going to introduce her. My name is Daniele Horton. I'm a proud Latina minority women-owned business. I'm the founder and CEO of Verdani Partners, which is a full-service sustainability consulting firm. I have 25 years of experience in architecture and sustainability for large real estate portfolios. We currently work with 21 large national and international real estate portfolios, about 6,000 properties in US, Latin America, Asia Pacific, and Europe. And we do comprehensive programs around sustainability, decarbonization, resiliency, healthy buildings, biodiversity, DEI, ESG reporting, and green building services. I'm also very committed to fighting climate change through the built environment. This is a lifetime commitment. And to advance sustainability fast beyond the work we do for our clients, I also founded a nonprofit organization called Verdani Institute for the Built Environment, and we focus on striving to advance sustainability through education and collaboration on a global scale. I'm also an adjunct professor of sustainable real estate at the University of San Diego for the past 10 years, and I published a book called Earth Climate Heroes to teach kids about climate change. And I'm really excited to be part of this discussion with Debi-Lee to talk about innovative solutions to fight some of our biggest climate challenges, and really hope to ignite more passion for a more sustainable and resilient world. And Debbie's going to focus more on the climate mitigation strategies, and I'm going to focus more on climate adaptation strategies. And so now I'd like to introduce Debi-Lee so that she can introduce herself.
Hi, thank you, Danielle. Yes, so my name's Debi-Lee Wilkinson, CEO of Kepler ReCapture, one of several founders. Actually, we founded ourselves as a team in response to the Elon Musk Foundation's sponsoring a competition with X Prize for carbon removal. And we've gone so much beyond removing carbon that we've actually dropped carbon from our name. But we do carry the name Kepler from our aerospace company, Kepler Shipyards, named after an astronomer. And so we came in to look at the climate problem from the aerospace perspective, and not so much rockets, but space colonies, putting people in space, habitats, supporting people, spacesuits, those sorts of things. And so when you move to real estate off-world, if you will, the idea of just bringing in what you need and, shipping your waste back out does not work. So the circular economics and the zero waste or minimal waste principles were a perfect fit. So we did come up with a solution that is marine-based carbon dioxide harvesting platforms. And I will tell you more about them. And I'll turn it back to
Thank you.
Danielle.
I told Debi-Lee that meeting her was one of the highlights of my conference, so I'm really excited about what her firm's coming up with. So we are in Las Vegas, which is a city known for its architecture innovation and also facing climate risks like water scarcity and extreme heat, right? It's like 100 degrees outside. And so we are finding ourselves as this pivotal moment in terms of our battle against climate change. And the built environment is a huge a substantial portion of global carbon emissions, and it requires our urgent attention so we can create a more sustainable and livable future. Buildings contribute to almost 40% of global energy consumption and 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. And also like 98% of our buildings already exist and needs to be retrofitted. And carbon emissions need to be cut 80% by 2050. And about 75% of our buildings are 20 years old, more than 20 years old, and ready for a retrofit. And when you think about, our topic in green buildings, and from an embodied carbon perspective, embodied carbon, right, it's all the carbon that took to build, like this chair, these materials. The greenest building is a building that is already here. When you think about the business case for green buildings and sustainability, there's a lot of financial benefits. In terms of increasing rent, occupancy, low operating costs, higher building values and returns on investments, saving through efficiency measures. So it's not only the environmental benefit, but there's also it's a win-win also from a bottom line perspective as well. Like for every $10,000 that you save through energy efficiency, asset value increases by, let's just say, $150,000 using a 6.5 cap rate. So it also benefits from a tenant retention, lower vacancy, lower turnover, higher occupancy, health, and productivity. And so green buildings are very critical to combating climate change and reducing emissions, improving efficiency, and also making sure they're resilient. And so, we really have a huge urgency in terms of take action, including like our current projections are to increase emissions by 11%, and which is, we actually need to reduce it by 80% by 2030 to meet the IPCC targets for temperature rise. So the real estate industry really needs to accelerate its decarbonization efforts. We're going to have to decarbonize our entire economy, from transportation, the building sector, and we also need to, and so we're going to see a lot more strict regulations on, in terms of to push the industry to decarbonize. We're also going to see a focus on biodiversity as we're facing kind of like the 6th mass extinction. We're going to have to focus on how we create a more positive impact from a biodiversity perspective in our buildings. So our discussion today is going to focus on climate change mitigation and adaptation through decarbonization and resiliency strategies, but we're also going to talk about green building practices, strategies to minimize emissions, resource reduction, passive design, biophilic elements, and we'll address climate risk and resiliency measures. Debbie's going to cover carbon credits, which is a really important topic to help us with carbon neutrality, and focus on the development of sustainable materials, which I'm really excited to hear more about it. So green buildings certification also play an important role, and we're going to talk about that. So I know it's really late. I appreciate you being here with us today. So a question for Deb. So she's a scientist and is leading a team of innovators to solve carbon removal and sequestration at scale. Her organization is at the forefront of developing innovative technologies and approaches to decarbonize the built environment with marine-based solutions. So she's going to talk about her organization's efforts into removing carbon emissions from the ocean and developing sustainable building materials, including concrete substitutes and biogeomaterials. She's also going to shed the light on the role of carbon credits in helping buildings in the real estate industry to achieve their decarbonizations through offset strategies. So can you briefly share the key role that carbon credits play in reducing emissions and how your organization is addressing carbon removal and sustainable materials?
Yes. So the embodied carbon that you're speaking about and that you are attributing to the real estate market the core reason for that is that the world's energy supply is from fossil fuels. So until that reduces, your only options are reducing the amount of energy used. We're maybe making some progress in the transportation in some alternative, less polluted fuels like methane. But it's really an uphill battle that you're looking at. So so then the alternative, since you could only until clean energy is available readily, then the building is going to have a positive, be carbon positive, as they like to say. So there will be carbon emissions associated with whatever's built and put in place from transportation to development. And it has nothing to do with whether there's actually carbon in the building material, or not. And so then the alternative, so until we get our, the MoRE operations in place, the alternative is, since you can't help but emit carbon while you're building something due to the power structure, the power infrastructure that we have, your next option is to have somebody else or another company, basically you're contracting them to remove the carbon dioxide that your project has emitted into the atmosphere. And so that's where my company and other carbon removal companies come into play. And that exchange of carbon emission commodities is done by carbon credits. So solar and wind, they also have an embodied carbon in their facilities and to where they are erected and built and implemented. So while they strive to be carbon negative, they produce power without creating direct emissions. They are making up for. They still have to make up for their embodied carbon before they're actually making progress. And I know initially they were carbon neutral at best, where they really didn't save anything. And I don't know the state of the technology, but I assume we're doing better with that now. So then our project, when we went to remove carbon from the environment, then we have to be, it's even more critical that we're using an emissions-free power source, and the only, or the best source that we found, in part because our chief engineer is a shipbuilder, but I think it really is the case that the ocean has energy in the density and a recoverable energy, and the densities that we need in order to produce a facility that will actually remove enough carbon dioxide to impact, as the IPCC has forecasted that is necessary. And we have, 3 proprietary methods of extracting that energy. But even when it's built, will have embodied carbon. It will be carbon positive. And then as we start to remove carbon from the environment and convert it to building materials, some of which we will use to build more facilities, so that only our initial facility will have embodied carbon. Then at that point, we're carbon neutral. And that should be happening very soon after the project is rolling. And then as it continues to extract, then it's carbon negative, which is a little counterintuitive because we like the word harvesting carbon dioxide because we're actually collecting it and building it, turning it into construction materials. So, and yet it's called carbon negative. So, but the reference point is the carbon emissions on that standpoint. So I'll talk first. So as one of the ways that we'll be extracting carbon. It'll come to us as carbon dioxide, and there are some very high value materials for like carbon fibers, maybe you've heard of carbon nanotubes, and graphene and graphites and graphenes. In fact, there's an entire industry, I don't know if they're talking about it next door or not, for especially for the electronics industry that utilize these. And graphene is currently $1,000 a gram. Once it's produced on scale, of course, that price will come down. But there's, instead of throwing the carbon away, we're converting it to materials. Now, as we're processing the seawater, then we're also desalinating the water without the downsides and the limitations of other desalination technologies. So we're providing fresh water, and now you might think of it as, well, the ocean's already salty, so it's okay to dump your salty brine back into the ocean. But frankly, if you dump the fresh water or the salty water, the brine, back into the ocean, you're actually polluting. And if you do it on one side of the platform and on the other side, brine, then you're adding too much, or then there isn't enough salt on the other side. So at worst case, at a minimum, we would have to recombine them and put them back into the ocean. So we said, well, that's dumb. There's freshwater shortages, there's salt shortages, and then once you take the salt out of the brine, now it's calcium and magnesium carbonates, and the next thing you get is the lithium carbonates, which are utilized in the car batteries. And there's a shortage of that, plus ethical challenges in its production, as well as the battery handling at the end. But so we've actually been able to come up with multiple solutions by taking the zero waste approach, that we just keep carving it down to all these very rare elements in the ocean now become accessible in a profitable manner, plus with multiple revenue streams, energy, water, because we're actually producing more energy than we need, energy and water, salt and magnesium and building materials. The calcium and magnesium carbonates are your basis for the concrete and the concrete substitutes called geopolymers. And then there's also biopolymers, biocomposites that we can do, so that we can actually produce green building materials. We'll use some of them for ourselves, but they'll also be in excess. So we'll be able to sell those to buildings who are trying to reduce the carbon. And without that, I don't think you will get to 80%. And as far as building to the green future, with our project, it's almost down to implementation and time, because it will take time to do it. Instead of, we don't know how to do it. So now yes, so meanwhile, Danielle's clients need to do the best they can with what is currently available to them. So please allow me to introduce my fellow panelist, Daniele Horton, Verdani Partners. She is the founder and CEO. She is an ESG expert for the real estate sector that is working on large real estate portfolios. I focus on carbon mitigation and decarbonization, and Daniele will focus on climate adaptation and resilience. She will leverage her wealth of experience working with large real estate portfolios to share insights into addressing climate risks, enhancing resilience, prioritizing occupant well-being, optimizing the use of resources, incorporating green buildings certifications, and integrating diversity-friendly elements in the built environment. Her expertise in these critical aspects of sustainable building practices will enlighten our discussion on creating greener, healthier, and more resilient built environments.
Thank you. That's fascinating, and I'm really excited to learn more about your decarbonization projects. One way that I like to talk to my students about, like how you think about climate adaptation and mitigation It's like if you have a bathtub filling with water, what is the first thing you're going to do? Are you going to reach for the mop, or are you going to try to close the tap, right? The first thing you're going to do, you're going to try to close the tap. However, we cannot stop pumping carbon emissions in the air right away. So we have to, at the same time that we're trying to remove carbon emissions, we have to focus on the climate adaptation mitigation strategies. And I think, this conference is a very diverse audience, and a lot of the developing countries that actually are not the ones causing the problem are going to be facing the biggest impact of climate change. So when you think about like the built environment role, like in buildings in this, it's really critical. So when you think about it, like decarbonization is also on the kind of climate mitigation piece, where we have to be electrifying our building stock, which is going to take time, but that's a really important component of reducing carbon emissions. Transitioning away from fossil fuel-based systems to electric alternatives, like electric cooling, induction cooking, using renewable energy sources for power generation. That also can really reduce emissions. And building electrification is going to be a huge step to achieving a more sustainable, low-carbon future. Another really important aspect of green buildings is building health. And we, from a pandemic, we saw what happened with the pandemic, that raised a lot of awareness about the importance of health and having a good indoor environment. So buildings are also having to adapt as well and focus on reducing cross-contamination, improving air quality, and kind of, the pandemic's also really reinforced the importance of creating this space that's going to help us protect from airborne infections. And better indoor air quality also has a huge impact on employee productivity and improves cognitive function. The more like outside air, the more air flow you have, you're going to have a better, healthier building. When you think about green buildings, certifications also play a really important role because it adds a layer of credibility to your sustainability claims. And during the pandemic, certifications like WELL and FitWell also gained a lot of importance, especially as people are trying to get building occupants back to their building. They were like worried. They wanted to make sure that the air quality was good. So these certifications helped add that credibility. When we think about climate change mitigation, we are working with our real estate portfolios to do those climate risk assessments to really understand their risks, right? Whether it's sea level rise, risk for flood, heat, extreme heat. There's a lot of different types of risks that buildings are facing because, and so companies need to really understand those risks from a business continuity perspective, protect public health, ensure social equity and cohesion, and also make sure they have an emergency preparedness plan in place. So we help them come up with a strategic plan, do their risk assessments. If the property is high risk, we make them do an on-site assessment, and then it's like looking at implementing those mitigation strategies and having more resilient buildings. One of our clients' portfolios, we saw they're high risk, and they installed floodgates and dewatering pumps, and when Hurricane Harvey hit in Texas, all the other buildings around them flooded, and they had zero insurance claims. I mean, a lot of properties in California, Florida, places are uninsurable, so taking those steps to protect your property, protect building occupancies, and maybe even help you make the case to get insurance is really critical. Another passive design is also going to be really important. I grew up in Brazil, and I used to design, I designed a 4-star shopping mall with all passive design and natural ventilations. And here we put 4-story, put glass in the 4 facades, and we just put HVAC. So we really need to learn to design with nature and do better in terms of incorporating passive design strategies, also to reduce the amount of HVAC and energy consumption that you need in our buildings. I think U.S., our buildings are one of the most inefficient in the world, and we use the most carbon on a per capita basis. So we have a long ways to go in making our buildings more efficient. From a biodiversity perspective as well, it's really critical that we integrate more biodiversity-friendly buildings, from green roofs to, like grass. Grass is terrible. It uses so much power, so much water, and we need to really focus on incorporating green spaces that support the local, biodiversity as well. So, from addressing climate risks, enhancing resiliency, and prioritizing occupant health and well-being, and optimizing resource use, incorporating passive design strategies, pursuing green building certifications, and integrating biodiversity-friendly elements are really critical in creating a more sustainable green building. And so, these principles are really important so we can have kind of greener, healthier, more resilient built environments that can contribute to our future generations. So just kind of some concluding remarks. I know we have our awards coming up, but so we really talked about climate adaptation, mitigation, and talked about importance of focusing on both the mitigation and the adaptation, which is the mitigation, which is decarbonization, and the adaptation, which is making our buildings more resilient. Occupant well-being is really important as well, and I think that the discussion from Debi-Lee also in terms of the role of carbon credits as well. Like I work a lot with like commercial high-rise buildings, like even if we wanted to do on-site renewable energy, like we don't have enough space to generate our own power. So it's really important that we also leverage innovations like her large-scale projects for removing carbon from the oceans. And also, I think it's also fascinating that using that carbon to generate building materials when we think about from a circular economy perspective, and that potential to reduce carbon footprint of the built environment while also focus on regenerative principles, which we really need to think about that with everything we do. We also talked about challenges with our power supply and our reliance on fossil fuels, and how we really need to switch our entire industry to renewable energy sources, and thinking about ways to kind of reduce our offsetting our embodied carbon through carbon credits and offsets is really important. From green building certifications as well, LEED and WELL, FitWell, IRM, they're really important in terms of adding that layer of validation. Our portfolios do a lot of like ESG reporting frameworks where you're gauging how sustainable your organization are, and the percentage of certified buildings is also a metric that they use to gauge how sustainable an organization is. We also talked about passive design strategies, building electrification, prioritizing occupant comfort and productivity, and it's really important to incorporate those strategies in our buildings. It was interesting to, I was at a conference here like a week ago, and a lady that kind of talks about their water resources even for Las Vegas, right? We're in the middle of the desert, and we have a lot of like grass here, and how they're like working really hard to kind of retrofit the buildings as well to kind of reduce their energy consumption and to especially their water consumption, because they're removing more water from the Colorado River than it's being replenished. And once that water is out, they're going to have to deal with things like desalination, which is going to be very expensive. So it's really important that we focus on conservation first, which will help us also buy time, because we do have finite resources. But just to wrap us up, it's really important that sustainable green building practices are going to also require collaborative efforts from various stakeholders, right? From building owners, from building occupants, landlords. And it's really important to embrace innovative technologies like, what Debi-Lee's team is working on, sustainable materials, and for us to be committed to sustainable practices that can address climate change, reduce emissions, and enhance the well-being of both the planet and our occupants. So by incorporating these strategies on design, construction, and operation processes, we can pave the way for a greener, healthier, and more resilient future, one building at a time. And that concludes our panel. Thank you.
Do we have time for even one question, maybe? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could give me some examples of passive solar, because I've heard it discussed, but nobody actually seems to know what it is, basically. And I've worked a little bit with passive solar in the past, but not recently. So I'd just like to find out what, the state of the art of passive solar is, and what your favorite passive solar things are.
Yeah, there's, when we think about energy generation, passive design, there's passive and active systems. I'd say passive is like shading, is reducing the emissions, but solar is actually an active system where
just passive in general.
Yeah, passive design strategy. I mean, when we think about even like in California, like before you're like allowing the sun in the winter and blocking in the, blocking the summer, like that doesn't even work anymore because it's so hot right now. You have to kind of block it at all seasons. In terms of like doing anything to kind of shade it before the heat kind of gets into the building. There's a lot of passive design strategies like where you like hot air rises. So when you allow that hot air to kind of exit the building, it's also going to help you create a building that's kind of more efficient. So the key things, like if you have your west facades where it's taking the most sun as well, like make sure you're not putting a lot of windows on that side. So it's really important to look at building orientation, shading, like leveraging like mechanics of how airflow works in terms of like being able to allow like even putting windows on the top so that hot air can exit the building. So there's so many strategies that can be leveraged. I mean, they can only go so far, right? When you have 100-degree weather outside, you're probably going to need to leverage active strategies in solar too. But I think it's really important to do all of that first to make your, and adapting to your local regions. When you look at indigenous like architecture and everything, they work with nature, they work with local materials and the local climates to kind of create that architecture that it's going to be as efficient as possible and less harmful, and that will require less, mechanical ventilation to cool the building.
Yeah, so before air conditioning, people would build the houses in such a way that the air would move through the house. And I've been in houses, an apartment, and it was particular, I was getting the afternoon sun. But the way the buildings, the windows and the sliding glass door was set up, I couldn't really get a good cross breeze. The apartment I'm in now, I'm on the second floor, so it's very nice. The wind comes in towards the bedroom side. I open the window there, and if it got some good air movement, I don't even have to turn the fan on.
We probably need to wrap up for the award. So thank you so much for sticking around.